Welcome to the Ultimate Bard Class Guide for Pathfinder Second Edition. This video is going to be split up into 6 distinct chapters, which you can find either in the description below or by scrolling along the video's play bar. These 6 chapters are going to explain the Bard class in incredible detail, going over every single aspect of it. But if you're only looking to make a level 1 Bard character, you only need to worry about the first 2 chapters. Throughout this video, I'm going to cover all of the Bard's level 1 proficiencies and class features, all of the class features they gain from level 2 through 20, all of their feats in full detail, as well as all of their composition spells, the unique spells that only bards can cast. And the video will be wrapped up by giving a few different build ideas for you to either copy or inspire you on a good direction to take your bard. With all of that being said, please leave a like and a comment on this video, subscribe to the Known At Ones channel, and let's begin. So, starting out, what exactly is a bard? Well, if you've played other TTRPGs, you probably have a good idea. A bard is an occult magician who brings forth the powers of their magic through art and performance. This magic is not arcane, primal, or divine. It is listed as occult magics because no one quite fully understands exactly how it works, and that's where all the weird magic goes that we don't understand. Bards can perform their magic through any kind of art. The standard is music. Some will sing, some will play an instrument in the middle of the battlefield to bolster their allies. But in Pathfinder Second Edition, there is no specification on what your performance has to be. You could be a dancing bard if you wanted to, or, with some GM permission, you could even be a bard who draws mid-combat and shows the class your pretty pictures to get your abilities to go off. The Bard is a charisma-focused class, meaning they are great as the face of the party. They are really good at talking and have a heavy emphasis on their own personality being powerful enough to sort of overthrow opposing personalities. If you're looking for someone who's a master at deception, diplomacy, and intimidation, the Bard can be great at all 3. As I said, the Bard is a charisma-focused class, and charisma is their key ability score, giving you a +1 ability modifier boost just for picking Bard as your class, and you'll be starting with 8 plus your con mod in hit points and gaining that same amount every time you level up. For starting proficiencies, they begin expert in perception and expert in will saving throws, although only trained in fortitude and reflex. All bards begin trained in occultism and performance and gain 4 additional skills plus their intelligence modifier proficiencies. While they don't get quite as many skills as a rogue, the bard can still get a wide plethora of different skills that they can utilize, especially if you put a few boosts into intelligence. All bards are trained in not only light weapons, but all martial weapons as well, and they're trained in light armor. So you can't wear anything too heavy, but you've got the pick of the crop for your weaponry. They're also, of course, trained in spell attack mods and spell DCs, as well as the Bard class DC, which will probably never get used for anything. I'll be honest, in the remaster, I don't quite understand why class DCs are still a thing. They come up so rarely, but monks use them sometimes. Don't forget, at level 1, you get to add +1 to any 4 of your ability modifiers of your choice. This applies to every class, but I like to mention it just because people forget that a lot and wonder why they're so weak at level 1. And just like every character, at levels 5, 10, 15, and 20, you do get to apply 4 more +1s to 4 different scores of your choice. Bards are spontaneous spellcasters, meaning they have a smaller repertoire of known spells, but as long as they have spell slots available, they can cast any of them. And at level 1, you can cast any 2 first-level spells per day, meaning if you know 3 different spells, you can cast 2 different ones or any of those spells twice in the same day. Because the Bard is a spontaneous caster, they cannot heighten their spells normally. Rather, if you want to cast the same spell at rank 1, 2, and 3, you will need to learn that spell at ranks 1, 2, and 3, taking up 3 of your total known spells in your repertoire. There is an exception to this, but we'll get to that at level 3. And of course, bards have the ever-popular cantrips, which can be cast any number of times per day and automatically scale up their rank to be equal to half your character level, rounded up. If you're level 5, all of your cantrips are rank 3. Bards also have unique spells known as composition spells and composition cantrips. These function very similar to your spell slot spells, however they use your focus pool. You start the game with 1 focus point, and in order to cast a composition spell, you spend that focus point. And by spending 10 minutes focusing on your art or doing something non-combat related and just focusing your energy, you can get that focus point back without needing to take a full, long rest. Composition cantrips are very similar, except they do not cost a focus point. All bards start with the Courageous Anthem composition cantrip, which is very hard to say, and the counter performance composition spell. I'll be going over those in Chapter 4 when I cover all of the composition spells at once. I'll be covering those in Chapter 4 when I cover all the different composition spells, but I will put a time code right there so that you can jump exactly to when I talk about Courageous Anthem and counter performance. At level 1, all bards must select their muse. This is your subclass, and unlike someone like a ranger or a barbarian, your subclass doesn't lock you out of a whole lot. Rather, your muse is going to give you a small chunk of bonuses. All your muse is going to grant you is a first level feat, which we'll go over in Chapter 3, and it'll add a spell to your repertoire. This spell does not count against the 2 first level spells you got to pick, so you will have 3 total first level spells at level 1 to choose from, 2 that you picked and 1 from your muse. The first muse is the Enigma Muse. Your bard is enamored by something they can't quite explain and as such want to learn more and more about it or just make art about the enigma and its inability to be fully understood. The Sure Strike spell will be added to your repertoire and you will gain the Bardic Lore feat, which I talk about at this timecode. The Maestro Muse is for bards who seek inspiration from even greater artists or perhaps deities who embody art itself, such as, I forgot your name already, Shellen. Oh my god. Like Shellen. The Soothe spell is added to your repertoire and you gain the Lingering Composition feat, which is talked about here. The Polymath is a type of muse for bards that wish to either seek inspiration from multiple different sources or perhaps one muse source that represents the chaos or multi-layered facets of the world. The spell Phantasmal Minion is added to your repertoire and you gain the Versatile Performance feat talked about at this timecode. And finally, the Warrior Muse is for bards who seek inspiration on the battlefield. They hear the song of the clang of steel on a fresh war battle thing. I don't know, where do people fight? Taverns? At the end of the day, they are inspired by combat and thus seek out combat. They get the Fear spell added to their repertoire and the Martial Performance feat, which I talk about right here. And that is all the level 1 class features for a bard. If you're looking to just make a bard, you're ready. Aside from maybe the feats and the cantrips that I talked about earlier and time-coded to, you've got all the information you need to play a level 1 bard. But what if you want to play past level 1? All the way to 20? Well, let's move on to Chapter 2. 3? Where am I? We're talking about the class features from level 2 to 20. Starting at level 2, bards gain a feat every even level, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, etc. You gain a new feat equal to or lower than your current character level. Also at second level and every even level thereafter, you gain a skill feat. As long as you meet the proficiency requirements of a skill feat with the required skill, then you can take it and add it to your character. These are usually new abilities or benefits you gain from certain situations. Starting at level 3 and then levels 7, 11, 15, and 19, you gain a general feat. General feats are exactly what they sound like. They are generally useful. They can give you proficiency in a higher level of armor, or they can give you movement speed, or things like that. You only get 5 of them in the entire game, so make them count. And if you choose to, you can forego a general feat entirely in exchange for a skill feat. I just don't usually recommend this because you get 10 skill feats and only 5 general feats. Also at third level, reflex save proficiency increases from trained to expert. The big thing at third level, however, is the bard gets their first signature spells. Effectively, for every rank of spell you can cast, you can choose one spell you know of that rank. From then on, that singular spell can be heightened at will to higher spell levels. So if you have first level Force Barrage, but you have access to third rank spell slots, well, you can heighten that Force Barrage if it's your signature spell. If Force Barrage is not your signature spell and you want to cast it at third level, you would need to learn Force Barrage a second time at third level. It's not called Magic Missile, is it anymore, is it? Oh no, what is it called? Am I gonna have to dub over myself? The final benefit at 3rd level and every odd level thereafter is a skill increase. You can either become trained in a new skill or increase any existing skill from trained to expert. Starting at 7th level, you can increase skills from expert to master, and starting at 15th level, you can increase skills from master to legendary. Starting at 5th level and every 4 levels thereafter, you get ancestry feats from your ancestry. It's pretty cut and dry. At level 7, the Bard's spell attack modifier and spell save DCs all increase to expert. Basically, you hit level 7, all your spell attacks get +2, all your DCs are 2 higher. Great stuff. At level 9, the Bard's fortitude saves increase to expert proficiency, and their will saves increase to master proficiency. Not only that, but from now on, if the Bard ever normal succeeds at a will saving throw, they will critically succeed automatically instead. At level 11, not only does your perception proficiency increase to master, but you also get expert proficiency with all simple and martial weapons. Not only that, but you also get to apply the critical specialization effect of any of those weapons whenever you land a critical hit. At level 13, your light armor and unarmored defense proficiency increases to expert, and you gain weapon specialization, allowing you to deal a flat 2 bonus damage with any weapon you are expert proficiency with. At level 15, Bards get Master Spellcaster, once again increasing their spell attack rolls and spell DCs by +2 as they increase their proficiency to Master. At level 17, Great Performer's Heart increases your will saving throw proficiency to Legendary. Now, on top of automatically crit succeeding in normal success, any critical failure becomes a normal failure instead. Effectively, you've only got 2 results now for will saves. You will either fail or critically succeed. There is no in between. On top of all of that, if you do happen to fail a will saving throw against a damaging effect, you take half damage. And at level 19, not only do you become a legendary spellcaster, increasing your spell attack modifier and spell save DCs to legendary proficiency, but you also get the coveted 10th level spell slot from Magnum Opus. There's a few caveats to this spell slot, but for the most part, it functions like a normal spell slot. You just cannot gain another 10th level spell slot from any other means except one specific level 20 Bard feat. And there's all of the class features for Bards. We are now entering the big, thick portion of this video where I go over every single feat available to the Bard class. Strap in, because we're going to be here for a while. Bardic Lore. Specifically for the Enigma Muse Bard, you gain a unique lore skill, Bardic Lore. This lore can only be used to recall knowledge, but it can be used on any subject. The caveat is that it will stay at trained proficiency, only increasing to expert if your occultism skill reaches legendary. So if you're in a random dungeon and you just need to know what kind of cuisine kobold culture tends to enjoy, you can use Bardic Lore on that or anything else in the world. And for the GMs out there, keep this in mind. Bardic Lore is very generalized, and the DC for recalling knowledge is lower the more specific you can be. So even though a bard can use this skill on anything, feel free to raise the recall knowledge DC a couple of points because it's so non-specific. Hymn of Healing. This is a unique composition spell that I will be going over in the next chapter. Lingering Composition. This is a unique focus spell only available to the Maestro Muse, and I'll be going over it in the next chapter. Martial Performance for the Warrior Muse. If you have Courageous Anthem currently active, then the next time you land a strike on an opponent, you get to extend the duration of Courageous Anthem by 1 round, meaning you don't need to spend an action on the following turn to recast it. You can, however, only do this once per Courageous Anthem. If you ever gain Rallying Anthem or Song of Strength, this 1-round extension can also be applied to those. Now, unfortunately, these are all composition cantrips, and composition cantrips specifically limit you to casting 1 per turn and only having 1 active at a time. So you can't have Courageous Anthem and Rallying Anthem both on at the same time and then extend both with a single strike. That would be cool, but unfortunately it is not possible. Reach Spell. For 1 action before casting a spell, you can increase the range of that spell. If the spell already has a set range, you increase that range by 30 feet. Or if a spell is normally a touch spell, it gains 30 feet of reach. Versatile performance for the Polymath Muse. You can use your performance skill to make an impression, demoralize, and impersonate instead of using diplomacy, intimidation, or deception. Along that same line, you can use your performance skill proficiency to qualify for any skill feat that requires that same proficiency in diplomacy, intimidation, or deception. Phenomenal feat. Well versed. You gain a permanent +1 circumstance bonus to any saving throw made against an effect with the visual, auditory, linguistic, illusion, or sonic trait, just forever. If it affects any of your sight or hearing senses, you are resistant to it. Cantrip expansion. You add 2 new cantrips to your spell repertoire, which is extra useful on spontaneous casters since they don't have to prepare their cantrips each day. They can just cast any cantrip they know. So instead of knowing 5 cantrips, you now know 7. Great if you have a lot of utility and need to pick up some damage, or vice versa. Directed audience. Any of your composition spells with an area can now be converted into a cone, and that cone can be up to 10 feet longer than the original area. So if you've got a 10-foot emanation composition spell, you could instead cast it as a 20-foot cone. Really useful if all of your allies doing the fighting are directly in front of you, so rather than awkwardly placing yourself between everybody, you can hang back and just blast them with an extra long cone, hopefully getting all of them in the effect. Emotional push. If an enemy fails a saving throw against any emotion spell effect, you can use your reaction to push them off guard until the end of your next turn. This is a great combo if you've got something like a wizard on your team where they can cast an emotion effect. You can use your reaction to make them off guard, and then you and maybe any other allies can make use of that penalty to armor class. Or you can open up with an emotion spell and follow that up with maybe a 1-action ranged attack to take advantage of the off guard if they failed their save. Esoteric Polymath for the Polymath Muse Bard. You gain a spell book and add every single spell in your repertoire to that book. From then on, during your daily preparations, you can pick any spell that you already know in your repertoire that is also in that book to become a signature spell for that day, allowing you to heighten it to any level at will. Alternatively, you can use your occultism skill to learn new spells and add them to this book. Then, if you learn a spell and add it to your book in this way, and that spell is not already in your repertoire, you can choose that spell during your daily preparations instead and cast it as though it was in your repertoire without it taking up one of your known spell slots. Just keep in mind that according to the Learn a Spell activity, the spell does still need to be on the occult spell list. You can't be adding primal spells to your Esoteric Polymath book. Lore Master's Etude for the Enigma Muse Bard. You gain the Lore Master's Etude, a composition spell that I'll be going over in the next chapter. You're going to hear that a lot today. Multifarious Muse. You can pick any other Muse subclass that you did not select and gain the first level feat of that Muse. Additionally, you now qualify for any other feat that has that Muse as a prerequisite. So if you began as an Enigma Bard and took Multifarious Muse for the Polymath Muse, you now qualify for both Enigma Muse feats and Polymath Muse feats. Song of Strength and Uplifting Overture are both composition spells that I'll be going over in the next chapter. Combat Reading. For 1 action, you choose an enemy, and the GM rolls a secret occultism check against that target's deception or stealth DC, whichever is higher. By succeeding at this check, you will gain information on the enemy you are fighting. This information includes highest weakness, lowest saving throw, an immunity, or highest resistance. If you critically succeed the check, you get 2 pieces of that information. If you normal succeed, you get 1. The reason this is a secret check is because if you critically fail, the GM gets to give you a piece of false information, which is always incredibly fun. The big thing with this feat is that the GM does pick which piece of information to get you. I'm sure you could homebrew this where you let the bard pick, because I feel like that just feels better in gameplay, but as written, the GM can choose which of those benefits to give you. Courageous Advance for the Warrior Muse Bard. For one action, if your next action is to cast Courageous Anthem, then one ally of your choice who is benefited by the composition cantrip can use their reaction to stride up to their movement speed. This is a little bit heavy. It's 2 actions and a reaction to give somebody a free stride, but if you don't have anything better to do with that action, letting your barbarian chase down an enemy for their reaction, that's pretty useful. In tune for the Maestro Muse. For one action, if your next action is to cast a composition spell that originates from you, you can instead have it originate from any ally within 60 feet. And if you have the feat that allows you to turn areas into cones, you can have that cone originate from the targeted ally. And I did double check, composition cantrips do count as composition spells. So if you don't care about yourself getting Courageous Anthem, you can just point to your fighter and have it originate from them, hitting the fighter, the barbarian, and the rogue, even if it might not hit you. There's a lot of versatility to this feat, it's great. Melodious spell. For one action, if your next action is to cast a spell, you can hide any and all manifestations of that spell inside your own performance. However, this does not hide the effects. So if you cast something like Fear, there will be no visual effect to connect you to that spell's effects. But if you cast something like Vomit Swarm, people are still going to see bugs coming out of your mouth. This is also super useful in roleplay, because if you use Melodious Spell and then cast a spell, then for a free action as part of casting that spell, you can create a diversion, demoralize, perform, or request, but only if the spell you're casting has the auditory, emotion, sonic, or visual trait. Rallying Anthem. You gain the Rallying Anthem composition cantrip, which I'll go over in the next chapter. Ritual Researcher for the Enigma Muse and requires you to be an expert in occultism. You permanently gain a +2 circumstance bonus to all primary and secondary caster checks for all rituals. If you plan to be using rituals, this is really good. Triple Time. You gain the Triple Time composition cantrip, which I will cover in the next chapter. Versatile Signature for the Polymath Muse Bard. During your daily preparations, you can swap any one of your signature spells to a different spell of the same rank. If your current signature spell is first level Force Barrage, you could trade it out for Grim Tendrils. Please tell me that's an occult spell. That's not an occult spell. Just dub over it in post with me saying Grim Tendrils. That'll be fine. Assured Knowledge for the Enigma Muse. Whenever you recall knowledge for any reason with any skill, rather than roll the dice, you can just take 10 plus your proficiency bonus. Keep in mind, if you've got other bonuses from feats or equipment or magic items of any kind, you do not get to apply those. This will only be 10 plus proficiency. And as long as you are an expert proficiency in a recall knowledge skill, you will automatically meet the requirements for the automatic knowledge skill feat, even if you didn't take assurance for that skill. Defensive Coordination for the Warrior Muse Bard, and Rallying Anthem is a prerequisite. If your next action is to cast Rallying Anthem, then you get to raise your shield as part of that action, and one ally affected by your Rallying Anthem can raise their shield as a reaction. It's decent. If you've got a paladin on the front lines who wants to raise their shield but doesn't want to use an action to do so, you can help them out by giving them a reaction to raise their shield so they can possibly do something else with a third action on their turn. Dirge of Doom. You learn the Dirge of Doom composition cantrip, which I'll go over in the next chapter. Okay, I explained this feat so wrong in my live recording that I have to redo the entire thing in post. Educate Allies is a reaction with a prerequisite that you have the well-versed feat. If an ally that is currently benefiting from one of your composition spells, like Courageous Anthem, is subject to an auditory, illusion, linguistic, sonic, or visual trait effect, you can grant all allies currently affected by your composition spell the +1 bonus from well-versed until the start of your next turn. On top of that, doing this increases your own personal bonus to +2. It's that simple. I don't know how I got it so wrong. Harmonize for the Maestro Muse. For one action, if your next action is to cast a composition cantrip, that becomes a harmonized composition cantrip, meaning you can have a second normal composition cantrip active at the same time. So for 3 actions, you can harmonize Courageous Anthem, and then with your 3rd action, cast Courageous Anthem, and you will have both active at the same time. There could be a world where this synergizes very well with the Warrior Muse Bard if they can haste themselves in some way to get an extra strike off. If you can get that 4th action on this character, you could harmonize Courageous Anthem, normal cast Rallying Anthem, and then make your hasted strike. And if you land it, you would extend both of those to last 2 rounds. It's a lot of hoops to jump through, but it would give you an entire free turn without needing to sustain either of them. Song of Marching. You gain the Song of Marching, which we'll cover in the next chapter. Steady spellcasting. If any opposing reaction would disrupt a spellcasting action you're currently taking, you have a DC 15 flat check you can make to not lose the action. I've never been a fan of the steady spellcasting feats. It's available for every spellcaster, but spending a feat to specifically give yourself a 25-ish% chance to not lose a spell because a monster's attack of opportunity happened to critically hit you while casting a spell is such a niche shit situation where 75% of the time it's not even going to matter. Accompany. As a reaction, if an ally within 30 feet would cast a spell, you can make a performance check against a very hard DC for the target's level. If you're the same level, it's just going to be a very hard DC for your level, usually somewhere in the realm of 15 plus your level plus 4 or 5 for a very high DC. As part of making this check, you must also spend a focus point if the target cast a focus spell, or a spell slot of 1 rank higher than the spell they just cast. However, if you succeed this check, the target does not spend their spell slot or focus point depending on the type of spell they cast. You are effectively spending your own resources as a reaction to conserve their resources. The downside of this is if you fail the check, you not only lose their spell slot, but you already sacrificed your spell slot as well. So you're banking on a success conserving their resource, but a failure wasting both of your resources. But if you're in need of healing and the cleric is about to use their last heal spell, it's not a bad idea. Call and response. For 1 action, if your next action is to cast a composition cantrip, then over the course of the next round, 1 affected ally can spend 1 of their actions to respond to it, extending the duration of that cantrip by 1 round. This can only be done once per spell cast, but it doesn't say anything about it not stacking with the Warrior Muse's 1st level spell, meaning as long as you can land a strike and somebody else can spend an action to respond, then your Courageous Anthem now lasts 3 rounds. Eclectic skill for the Polymath Muse Bard with a prerequisite of Master Proficiency in Occultism. Your proficiency bonus for any skill that you are not trained in becomes your level. If you're level 8 and trying to make an athletics check that you're untrained in, you get to add +8. Additionally, any skill check that would require you to be trained proficiency can be attempted by this bard. And if your occultism is legendary, then you can attempt any skill check that would require an expert proficiency. A really good use of this is being able to treat wounds without putting points into medicine proficiency. Just by adding your level, you should be able to hit those lower DCs, and once you are legendary in occultism, hitting an expert DC medicine check to heal for 4d8? Isn't that outlandish? Fortissimo Composition is a spell we'll cover in the next chapter. Know-it-all for the Enigma Muse. Whenever you succeed at recalling knowledge on a subject, you get 1 extra piece of information, and if you critically succeed when recalling knowledge on something, you get to ask the GM a follow-up question. Normally, when you critically succeed at recalling knowledge, you get extra information, or the GM answers 1 follow-up question. With the Know-it-all feat, you get to ask 2 follow-up questions. Reflexive Courage for the Warrior Muse Bard. As a reaction, as long as your Courageous Anthem is active and affecting you, you get to Attack of Opportunity. If a creature uses a Manipulate action, makes a ranged attack, or moves out of a square within your reach, you can make a melee attack against them, and a critical hit with that attack disrupts any Manipulate action they were trying to do. Soul Sight. You permanently gain 60-foot imprecise spirit sense, allowing you to sense any living creature nearby, most non-mindless undead, or even haunts, a specific type of trap usually consisting of a spirit inside. You do still need to take the seek action to accurately locate them, but you just, similar to smell and hearing, have access to this sense within 60 feet. Annotate composition. You can convert any of your composition spells into a scroll that can be activated by any creature that can read the language you wrote it in. Additionally, Fortissimo composition or lingering composition, which are specific spells that augment other composition spells you cast, can be added to the scroll by spending an additional focus point. This scroll can be activated until your next daily preparations, and for a single action, you can completely nullify the scroll, making it inert and no longer magical. It's a very versatile feat. You can give your barbarian your courageous anthem so they can activate it on their own. It's really, really nice. If you're not around for some reason and they have it on them, you're basically still there. I just punched you in the face. I'm so sorry. It's just super thematic. I love it. And if you're splitting the party, then giving another character the ability to use your courageous anthem is massive. Courageous Assault for the Warrior Muse Bard. For one action, if your next action is to cast Courageous Anthem, then any ally affected by Courageous Anthem can immediately use their reaction to make an attack roll. This feat is spectacular because, according to Player Core, the multiple attack penalty only ever applies on your turn, with the exception of readying a strike. So this is just trading 2 of your actions and an ally's reaction to give them a full bonus extra attack on your turn. So if you've got a fighter or a barbarian in the thick of it, you can now hit them with Courageous Anthem and have them attack again, giving them a second full bonus attack every single round. This might be one of the best Bard feats in the entire game. House of Imaginary Walls. I'll cover it next chapter. Ode to Ouroboros. I'll cover it next chapter. Quickened Casting. Once per day as a free action, you can reduce the number of actions required for the next spell you cast that turn by 1. However, it can only be up to 2 ranks lower than your highest spell level. So if you're level 10, you can cast up to 5th rank spells. This can only be applied to a 3rd rank spell or lower. And the number of required actions for a spell cannot go below 1. Symphony of the Unfettered Heart. I'll cover it next chapter. Unusual composition for the Polymath Muse Bard. For one action, if your next action is to cast a composition spell with the auditory or visual trait, then you can have this affect creatures that are normally immune to that trait, provided they can witness it with any other sense, including tremor sense. So if you've got a spell that comes with some kind of vibration effect, but it has the visual trait, then even though that blind creature with tremor sense can't see it, they can still feel it happening due to the vibrations, and it will affect them anyway. Very niche feat, but can be very useful against specific enemies. Eclectic Polymath, with a requirement of the Esoteric Polymath feat. During your daily preparations, when you add a new spell to your repertoire with Esoteric Polymath, then at the start of the next daily preparations, instead of losing that spell, you can instead choose to remove another spell of the same rank. If you've got 3rd rank Force Barrage, and during your daily preparations you add 3rd rank Vomit Swarm to your repertoire, then at the start of the next daily preparations, you can choose to remove Force Barrage and keep Vomit Swarm permanently. And then, of course, using Esoteric Polymath again, you can add a new spell to a different rank if you choose to. Enigma's Knowledge, requiring the Assured Knowledge feat. You can now apply the Automatic Knowledge skill feat to any Recall Knowledge check you ever make forever. However, it can still only be done once per round. As a reminder, Automatic Knowledge lets you use Assurance on Recall Knowledge as a free action once per round. However, remember, you don't get to roll this, so it'll be 10 plus your proficiency bonus. If it doesn't work one round, it's not going to work the next, even though you can keep doing it over and over again with this feat. Inspirational Focus. When you spend 10 minutes refocusing, you now get your entire focus pool back, rather than having to spend 10 minutes per focus point. Reverberate. As a reaction, if a creature or hazard would deal specifically sonic damage to you, then you can perform a performance check against the target's will DC. Or, if it's a hazard, fortitude DC. If you succeed, you reduce the damage you take by up to double your level, and if you critically succeed, you reduce it by up to quadruple your level. At level 12, that means you can reduce the incoming sonic damage by 48 and deal that same amount of damage back to the source. This feat is so niche because it only applies to sonic effects, but the fact that you can critically succeed a performance check against a massive sonic damaging effect, reduce the damage you took by 48, and deal 48 sonic damage back in turn. Fantastic when it's applicable. Shared Assault, with Courageous Assault as a requirement. When you use Courageous Anthem and the ally gets their free attack from Courageous Assault, if that ally critically succeeds their strike, so if you target their fighter, then another ally also affected by Courageous Anthem can also use their reaction for another free full bonus attack. Insanity. This does not chain into a third attack if the second ally critically strikes, but this can quickly become 2 actions and 2 reactions for 2 huge battle-swinging attacks. Fantastic feat. Allegro. You get the Allegro composition cantrip. You'll never guess which chapter I'm going to cover that in. Earworm. During your daily preparations, or by spending 10 minutes of your time, you can choose any of your composition cantrips to drill into your allies' heads so thoroughly that they can't stop hearing it. Then, as a free action, you can make a performance check against the target's highest will DC among your allies, so whichever ally has the highest will DC, and if you succeed at your performance check, the composition cantrip goes off and affects all allies who were affected by the earworm for a free action. And additionally, this goes beyond the range of the cantrip. If the cantrip only has a range of 30 feet, but all of your allies listened and learned the earworm during daily preparations, as long as they can see and hear you, it doesn't matter how far away they are. If you succeed the performance check, they all gain the benefit of that cantrip. Fantastic. Soothing Ballad, next chapter. Triumphant Inspiration for the Warrior Muse. From now on, whenever you critically hit an enemy with a melee or unarmed strike, you can cast any composition cantrip that normally costs 1 action as a free action, not even as a reaction. The hard part about recommending this feat is that bards cap their proficiency with weapons at expert. Everyone else is going to be a master, and you're stuck at expert. Critical hits from you are either going to rely on you attacking weaker enemies or getting a nat 20 on the die. But when it happens, that is great action economy. Though the problem with it is you're going to want to use Courageous Anthem before you attack to give yourself the +1 to increase your chance of critically hitting. But if you cast it before you attack and then you critically hit, you've already cast a composition cantrip that round. You can't cast another one unless maybe you used Harmonize. This feat is flawed. It's a cool idea, but it's flawed. True Hypercognition for the Enigma Muse Bard. For 1 action, you recall knowledge 5 times. Plain and simple. You can target 5 different enemies. You can target the same enemy over and over and over again until you succeed. You just 5 recall knowledge checks for 1 action. Usable as many times as you want. The caveat is that if you have any special abilities or free actions that can augment your recall knowledge, you cannot use them on these checks. Vigorous Anthem. For 1 action, if your next action is to cast Courageous Anthem, then you and all of your allies gain temporary hit points equal to 3 plus your Charisma modifier for 1 minute. This is not bad and doesn't have a cooldown. So if all of your allies are taking a little bit of damage each turn, then every single turn you can be giving your allies 7 temporary hit points over and over and over again every single round. If you're planning to cast Courageous Anthem every turn anyway, this is great. Courageous Onslaught with prerequisites of Courageous Assault and Courageous Advance. For 1 action, if your next action is to cast Courageous Anthem, then 1 ally affected can spend their reaction to stride and strike. And then if that hit is a critical hit, you can apply Shared Assault to chain that into another attack. This is insane. This is 2 actions and a reaction to move and strike with your strongest physical fighters, and if they critically hit, another physical fighter can attack as well. Incredible feat. Effortless Concentration. As a free action, once per turn, you can sustain any BARD spell. Not bad. Resounding Finale for the Maestro Muse. As a reaction, if you or any of your allies would take sonic damage, you can immediately end an existing composition spell to grant yourself and affected allies sonic damage resistance equal to twice the spell's rank, which is usually going to be equal to your level. So, by ending one composition spell you currently have going, then as a reaction, you grant yourself and your allies 16 sonic damage resistance. Again, very specific to be against sonic damage for this, but really useful when it comes up. Studious Capacity for the Enigma Muse, with Legendary Occultism proficiency as a prerequisite. If you have run out of spell slots, you can cast a spell as long as it is not equal to your highest rank available. You can only do this once per day, but at level 16, you can look at this as a free extra 7th level spell slot per day. And once you're higher level, that's an extra 8th level. And at max, an extra 9th level spell slot per day. Fantastic. All in my head. Possibly one of my favorite feats in the entire game, because you just convince yourself, no, I'm not actually hurt. As a reaction, if you take damage from a strike or a spell and the effect would not cause instant death, you can convert all damage you take into mental damage, and that mental damage gains the non-lethal trait. Basically, as a reaction, you can make any incoming damage non-lethal as long as it does not have the death trait. You can get blasted by a 10th level fireball and say, it's okay, it's not real, and just pass out from the non-lethal damage, going to stabilized, not dying. Incredible reaction. Deep Lore for the Enigma Muse with a requirement of Legendary Occultism proficiency. You gain 1 extra spell of every single rank you can cast. At level 18, you can look at this as 1 feat for 9 extra spells per day. Fantastic. Keep in mind, this does not apply to rank 10 spell slots because you can only gain those from a very specific feat and class feature. Discordant Voice. When you cast Courageous Anthem, you and all affected allies deal an additional 1d6 sonic damage with all of your weapon attacks. It is fine. 1d6 bonus damage at level 18 is not all that much, but I suppose if you've got some allies who can hit multiple times or can take advantage of a sonic damage weakness, this could be pretty useful. Thematically, this is very cool, that when you cast Courageous Anthem, your song imbues your allies' weapons with a vibration of sonic damage. It's just a super cool sight. Eternal Composition for the Maestro Muse. You are permanently quickened and can use this extra action only to cast 1-action composition cantrips. In addition, while exploring, you can simply say, I permanently have this 1-action composition cantrip active at all times, and still take any exploration activity. And if combat would break out while you're in exploration mode, then your composition cantrip is already active at the start of combat. So Rallying Anthem for that +1 AC to the party, phenomenal to use while in exploration mode. Impossible Polymath for the Polymath Muse Bard with Esoteric Polymath as a required feat. As long as you are trained in one of the appropriate knowledge skills, Arcana, Religion, or Nature, you can add spells of that tradition to your Polymath book. So you can finally add arcane spells and primal spells and divine spells into your book, which can be added to your repertoire for the day. However, even if you have eclectic polymath, you cannot keep these spells in your repertoire. They must be replaced or re-added the following day and can never be learned permanently. Still, there's no spell rank restriction on this. You're level 18. If you find a level 9 arcane spell, you can learn it, add it to your book, and add that to your spell repertoire for the day. Fantastic if you want a character who can cast literally any spell in the world. Fatal Aria, which I'll teach you about in the next chapter. Perfect Encore. You gain an additional 10th level spell slot. Pied Piping, which I'll cover next chapter. Symphony of the Muse with Harmonize as a prerequisite. You are no longer restricted to one composition spell per turn and one active composition at a time. You can now activate and sustain as many as you have actions to use. If on your turn you want to use Rallying Anthem, Courageous Anthem, and some third anthem, you can, and you can have them all active at one time. You can just become an emanating support for your allies, and I think that's great. Ultimate Polymath for the Polymath Muse. All spells in your repertoire are signature spells. Effectively, you can heighten any spell to any valid rank as often as you want, as long as you've still got spell slots of that rank. Fantastic feat, really lets the Polymath be the master of spellcasting when it comes to bards, and it just feels really good. And I would like to retroactively apologize for any times I might have said spell level instead of spell rank over the course of this video. But that is all 20 levels of Bard feats, which means it's finally time to move on to the next chapter to cover all of those composition spells I've talked about. I will be going over them in alphabetical order like it is in the book. If you need a reminder for when this spell becomes available, it's usually at a level equal to double its rank. For example, Allegro Cantrip 7 is available as a level 14 feat. The only exception to this rule is the ones you get as a level 1 bard automatically, like Counter Performance, or some of the ones you get as a level 1 feat from your muse. With that being said, let's dive right into it with Allegro. For one action, you quicken one ally within 30 feet. That's it. That's the spell. It's incredibly powerful. You get to give your action to another ally. However, it can only be used to step, stride, or strike. But if you've got an ally like a fighter that needs to get into position before they can attack and they need the extra action, Allegro is great. And it's a cantrip, so you can do this anytime you want, as much as you want. Fantastic feat. Counter Performance. If you or your allies within 60 feet of you are affected by a saving throw with the auditory or visual trait, you can put on a performance to distract your allies and save them from the effect. You make a performance check and your allies get to choose between using their saving throw result or your performance check result in place of their saving throw. You're a bard, you've got crazy performance. If the barbarian is making a will save, they'll probably be better off using your performance. You can save a lot of people with this. Just keep in mind, it's not a cantrip. This does take a focus point, so you can only do this so many times per combat. Courageous Anthem, the cantrip that every bard has and so many builds are based off of. For one action, you and all allies within 60 feet of you get a +1 to attack rolls, damage rolls, and saves against fear effects. It's a fantastic cantrip. You get it just from being a bard, and some of the feats like the Warrior Muse can really improve it to become a powerhouse of an ability. But no matter who you are, it's fantastic. It's +1 to attack rolls. That's always going to be really, really nice. Dirge of Doom. This is arguably the best composition cantrip in the entire game, and almost any bard could benefit from taking it. For one action, all enemies within 30 feet of you are frightened 1. No, not a saving throw to become frightened 1. All enemies are frightened 1. And cannot reduce that frightened value unless they leave your emanation. If you're unaware, frightened basically levels the target down 1. Frightened inflicts a penalty to all checks and DCs equal to the value. So as long as they are within 30 feet of you, they're taking -1 armor class, -1 attack rolls, -1 spell DCs, -1 saving throws. Everything goes down by 1. There is not a saving throw, and there's not a cooldown either, and it's a cantrip. Every single turn you can move, maybe attack somebody, and Dirge of Doom, and just reduce all enemies around you's combat efficiency by -1. Insane. Fatal Aria. This was one of the 20th level Bard feats, and for good reason. For one action, you target one creature within 30 feet and play music so beautiful or sorrowful they die. Once again, no saving throw to this. If the target is level 16 or lower, they die from hearing this. If the target is level 17 and has 50 or lower hit points left, they die. If the target is 18th level or higher, they just take 50 damage. Up front, no saving throw. And then they're immune for 1 minute. Sure, this costs a focus point, but you're not rolling any dice, they're not making any saves. You can look at the boss on turn 1 of the BBEG fight and go, hey, 1 action, lose 50 hit points. The end. Amazing. There's a reason this is a level 20 focus spell, and I'd say it's worth it. Sure, you can only use it once per round, but if you are fighting multiple enemies, then one of your actions every single turn can just be chunking 50 hit points off a different enemy every single round. Crazy. Fortissimo Composition, which in English means loud noise. As a free action, if your next action is to cast Courageous Anthem, Rallying Anthem, or Song of Strength, you can make a performance check against the will DC of your targets. In this case, it's your allies. If you succeed, these abilities grant +2 instead of +1. If you critically succeed, they grant +3. I want you to think about that. A critical success performance check, which is not that unlikely. It's probably your highest check on your character sheet. If you critically succeed, you're giving everyone, like say the fighter, +3 to hit, +3 damage, or Rallying Anthem, +3 armor class to your entire party. This is crazy. However, it is a little bit balanced because it is a focus point, so you can only do this up to 3 times. But if you can combine this in some way with something that can extend your compositions, you can have some insane buffs all going at the same time. +3 to hit and +1 armor class, maybe vice versa if you're using Harmonize. If you can take Multifarious Muse and go Maestro and Warrior, then you could use Fortissimo Composition on Courageous Anthem, and then you're giving yourself +3 to hit. You hit somebody, all of a sudden that +3 Anthem is lasting for 2 rounds. And then there was another feat up there somewhere that lets it extend another round. So sure, you're spending a focus point on this, but if you have the right feats, you can make that +3 armor class last 3 rounds for your whole party for 1 focus point. Nuts. And on top of everything, if you somehow normal fail this performance check, you don't even lose the focus point. And you get the normal +1 from these abilities. Fortissimo Composition, while it's only for the Maestro Bard, is fantastic. House of Imaginary Walls is fine. It's a cantrip, so it can be used over and over and over again, but its uses are somewhat limited. You mime a 10-foot wide by 10-foot tall wall that is invisible, but anybody who saw you performing the action believes the wall is there unless they specifically take a check to disbelieve the illusion. If they do successfully disbelieve it, they can just walk through it. But if you voluntarily believe it, you and your allies, you can even climb on top of it and be fine. The only downside is this wall does not block objects, so things like projectiles and stuff like that are going to go through, so it doesn't provide cover at all. All it can really be used for is really just climbing on top of, but a really creative player can probably do a lot with this feat. Hymn of Healing. For 2 actions, you target an ally within 30 feet or yourself and grant them Fast Healing 2. This means at the start of all of their turns, they regain 2 hit points, and this can be sustained up to 4 rounds. So in some ways, you can look at this as spend 5 actions, heal 8 hit points for a focus point. On the upside, every time you sustain it, they also gain 2 temporary hit points. But remember, temporary hit points don't stack, so you'll only have that buffer of 2 hit points per round, so if they didn't take any damage, they don't get 2 more temporary hit points, they just stay at 2. But this is a spell that scales pretty well. Every spell rank it goes up, the fast healing and temporary hit points both increase by 2. So just from level 1 to becoming level 3, you're now healing 16 hit points. It's not quite as good as something like Treat Wounds out of combat, but if you've got the extra actions and you want to go a full support with infinitely replenishable healing, because focus points just take 10 minutes to get back, Hymn of Healing is not bad. It is theoretically infinite healing. Lingering Composition for the Maestro Muse Bard. If your next action is to cast a composition spell with a duration of 1 round, you can make a performance check and spend a focus point. If you succeed that check, it instead lasts 3 rounds or 4 rounds on a critical success. If you fail, the composition lasts its normal 1 round duration, but you don't lose the focus point. This is pretty decent. The only downside is that this cannot be combined with the other Maestro focus spell to empower the buffs they grant. Otherwise, you'd be able to get +3 to hit for 4 rounds, which would be insane, but each individual spell can only have 1 spell shape applied to it. I somehow totally forgot to cover Lore Master's Etude, so you're getting post-editing known at once again. As a free action, if you or any ally within 30 feet of you attempts to make a skill check to recall knowledge specifically, you can spend a focus point and a free action to give them advantage. That's it. Nice and simple, really. If you have something like a Monster Hunter Ranger who grants bonuses for critically succeeding on recall knowledge checks against monsters, Lore Master's Etude is an incredible combo with it. Otherwise, I don't quite know if it's worth the focus point when you can just spend another action, but if you really need to get a recall knowledge check correctly, or if you're in roleplay and not in combat and you might only have 1 chance to recall knowledge on something, Lore Master's Etude becomes very useful. Ode to Ouroboros. By spending a focus point and your reaction, you stop somebody from dying. If their dying value would be ticked up to the value of which they would die, for most players that is dying 4, dying 5 if you have Die Hard, but if they were about to reach that point at the start of their turn, you can use your reaction and a focus point to keep them at their 1 below dying threshold. So if they're about to tick to dying 4, you spend a focus point and a reaction, and they stay at dying 3 that round. This also applies to situations where somebody might have died almost out of the blue. If your character is at Wounded 2 and gets critically hit and dropped to 0 hit points, they would technically automatically be at dying 4. So in that situation, someone could use Ode to Ouroboros and save your life. It might not come up super often, but it could really save the day in the right situation. Pied Piping, the other level 20 composition spell for bards, and it's... For 2 actions, all creatures within a 5-foot emanation of your location make a will save. If they critically succeed, nothing happens. If they normal succeed, they are fascinated by you, which Fascinate is probably the weakest debuff in the entire game. You can see what it does here on screen, but it's not that impressive. If they fail their saving throw, they are completely captured by your performance and must spend every single action on their turn walking up to you and complimenting your performance. But if you or any of your allies attack this target, it does break the spell. Now, the big benefit of Pied Piping is on a critical failure. Rather than just using their actions to compliment you, they become completely controlled by you with the minion trait, meaning for 1 action, you can give them 2 actions and they will follow them. On top of that, every single turn you sustain Pied Piping, the emanation does grow by 5 feet, and the max duration is a full minute. So after 10 rounds, you're going to have a massive 50-foot emanation around you with everyone in it either under your control or just wasting actions unless you and your allies attack them. The downside is that infamous incapacitation trait, meaning this is a really good spell against a horde of lower level enemies, but it's useless against anything higher level than you. Rallying Anthem. For 1 action, you and all allies within 60 feet of you gain a +1 status bonus to armor class and all saving throws, as well as resistance to physical damage equal to half this spell's rank. This might not sound like a lot, but being able to reduce damage at all adds up. It's like healing you don't need to do later. Song of Marching. Far more useful in something like an organized play situation than in your standard average daily campaign. For 1 action, sustained up to 1 hour, you and all allies within 60 feet of you can hustle alongside any other exploration activity. This basically just increases your movement speed while exploring for 1 hour a day. This upgrades to 2 and 4 hours at higher levels, but overall, The only real benefit it gives is that if you run into an encounter while performing this song, not only do you get to roll performance for your initiative, but you and all your allies also get a +1 status bonus to that initiative roll. So you can look at this as potentially +1 to initiative for the whole party, but only if an encounter happens during the hour you're sustaining this song. It seems really awkward to use overall. Song of Strength for the Warrior Muse Bard. For one action, you and all allies within 60 feet of you get +1 to all athletics checks, as well as +1 to your save DC against being shoved, tripped, repositioned, disarmed. This is okay. I don't think this needed to be restricted to the Warrior Muse. I think any bard should be able to bolster their allies' strength, and the fact that it is specifically only for athletics checks means this is so limited. Don't get me wrong, it's really useful out of combat if you need to climb a wall or help people get over a dicey check, but in combat, +1 to athletics isn't going to help a whole lot of your party. Maybe the barbarian will get better at tripping or grabbing somebody, but overall, it's not that great. Soothing Ballad. For 2 actions, you select yourself and up to 9 other allies within 30 feet of you, and you get to choose one of 3 effects. You can attempt to counteract any fear effects on the targets. You can attempt to counteract any paralysis effects on the targets, or you can restore 7d8 hit points to all of the targets. Most of the time, this is going to be used for healing, because if you can actually target 10 people with this, you're healing 70d8 for 2 actions and a focus point, which is really, really fun. Additionally, every time this ranks up, the healing goes up by 1d8. So if you're not hitting a lot of people with it, the hit points aren't that crazy, because you're level 14 here, remember. But overall, really great effect. It's a full party 7d8 heal that you can do as many times as you have focus points. You can't go wrong. Symphony of the Unfettered Heart. For 2 actions, you target yourself or an ally within 30 feet, and then can attempt a performance check to counteract one of the following effects on that target: grabbed, immobilized, paralyzed, restrained, slowed, or stunned. If you do fail, you can't target the same effect on the same person again for 24 hours. But if you tried to save them from being grabbed the first time, you could possibly save them from being immobilized the second time, since they're different effects. At character level 17, when this gets upgraded to rank 9, you can target 4 different creatures at the same time. It's good. It's a cool way to potentially get people out of being grabbed so they can use all of their actions on their turn, possibly to escape if they need to. Triple Time. For 1 action, you and all allies within a 60-foot emanation of you get plus 10-foot movement speed for the round. That's incredible. As someone playing an Earth Gnome Kineticist with armor in Earth and only 20 feet of movement speed, this would be insanely helpful to let me go from 20 feet per action to 30, because moving around the battlefield at that slow of a movement speed is brutal. Uplifting Overture. This is literally background music, the spell. For 1 action, you begin underscoring what your ally is trying to do, and you aid them. However, instead of rolling the same skill that they're rolling to aid, you get to roll performance. And if you fail, you succeed instead. Even better, once you are legendary in occultism, whenever you use this cantrip to aid, you automatically critically succeed, granting them +2 to whatever skill check they were trying to do. And hilariously, there's a caveat here where the GM can deny the bonus if you would be assisting with something like stealth, because you're playing music to underscore their sneaking. This is not Emperor's New Groove, where Kronk is sneaking through the city. Your music would make it easier to detect your ally. And that is all of the composition spells and cantrips for the Bard, which means we have 1 chapter left. And it's a nice little short one. Here's a few examples of how and why you could build your Bard in certain directions. The first 4 options are super obvious, as they lean into each of the 4 different Bard muses. You've got the Polymath Caster, who specializes in having a wider variety of spells to cast, and at higher levels, even casting spells from other traditions like Arcane and Divine, which other Bards cannot do. The downside of this is obviously Only the Polymath Muse Bard can do this, and there's a lot of required feats that go into making it happen, and if you're really interested in casting spells from multiple traditions, you don't get that until very high level. There's also the Warrior Muse combat support. While at first glance it might seem like the Warrior Muse Bard can step toe-to-toe with the enemies and go at them just as effectively as a fighter, that's just not the case. The Warrior Muse Bard is inspired by combat, but is not necessarily good at it. Remember, they max out at expert proficiency with their weapons. No, instead, what the Warrior Muse Bard is all about is being up close to the combat field, so that all of the other melee martial participants are within reach for Courageous Anthem, Courageous Assault, Shared Assault, all of that amazing action economy to give the other better combatants free bonus attacks against your enemies. The Warrior Muse Bard is great, but they are a support still. They are not a standalone fighter. There's also the Multi-Spell Maestro. There's not a whole lot to say about this, but it does primarily utilize Harmonize. With the Harmonize feat as a Maestro Muse Bard, you can have Rallying Anthem and Courageous Anthem active at the same time, effectively buffing your entire party's attack rolls, damage rolls, armor class, and saving throws at all times. Throw in some of those unique focus spells that the Maestro gets to increase the value of those bonuses or increase the duration of those composition spells. You've got some phenomenal versatility and the ultimate user of composition cantrips being the Maestro Muse. And then of course there's just the big brain Enigma Muse, who's really good at recalling knowledge. They take assured knowledge, know-it-all, and especially true hypercognition, being able to recall knowledge 5 times per round. Absolutely hilarious and insane. The big brain Enigma Muse Bard will be one of the smartest in-character characters at the table. But if you don't want to lean into your muse, there's a few different options you can take. There's what I lovingly refer to as the backup singer. You take some of the feats like Call and Response, Annotate Composition, which can give your spells to other people so they can use them when they need to, and Accompany. You can just power up your allies by working directly with them, often bouncing extra effects off of their spells with things like Accompany. It's a really, really unique way to play the Bard that doesn't rely on your muse at all, and it's got some fun interactions with your party. And finally, remember that you're a full caster. You don't even necessarily need to commit to any one chain of feats or any one build to be effective as a Bard. You will always have access to the entire occult spell list that you selected for your repertoire. You've always got your spell slots. You gain spell ranks just as fast as any other caster in the game. When in doubt, throw out some powerful spells and you're gonna have a great time playing your Bard. And there you have it. The ultimate Bard guide for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. If you found this helpful and enjoyable, please do leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and maybe send this to a friend you think might need some help making a Bard. Also, if you want to help support this channel and keep this kind of content coming, I do have a Patreon in the description with one single $10 tier. That is the only way to support on the Patreon. If you do, you will get your name at the ends of videos, just like these people right here. They're awesome. They help me keep doing what I'm doing, and they've helped me through a lot of tough times. So thank you all so much. I appreciate all of you for everything. And until next time, no nat ones.